In this worksheet, we're going to consider three different ways of applying manufacturing overhead and estimating an average cost per unit. Girardi Company makes a single product that's subject to wide seasonal variations in demand, and the company uses a job order costing system and applies overhead on the basis of quarterly actual overhead and actual production. Costs for the most recent quarter appear below, and we're asked to calculate our total manufacturing cost and an average cost per unit. Our total manufacturing cost is simply the sum of our direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So for the first quarter, it's $564,000. We take that and we divide the 564 by the 80,000 units and get an average cost per unit of $7.05. And we can just copy that across and we can see a variation in our average cost per unit. Look at the variation and try to link it to and think about how does it change in response to the number of units produced, and answer the following question. In part 2, we're told that to eliminate the large variations in the cost per unit, the firm has decided to apply overhead on an annual basis using a single predetermined overhead rate based on the number of units produced. We're asked to calculate the estimated manufacturing overhead cost per unit as well as the total cost per unit. Let's go ahead and begin by taking our total manufacturing overhead cost for the year. That's simply equal to the sum of our 4 quarters. That's the sum of the 228,000, the 204, the 192, and the $195,000. So our total manufacturing overhead is $819,000. Our total manufacturing or total annual production, again, we'll just take the sum of the quarterly productions, the 80 plus the 40 plus the 20 plus the 60 is 200,000. So the manufacturing overhead cost per unit will be $819,000 divided by 200,000 units, or $4.10 per unit. We want to calculate our total cost per unit, so we're going to calculate our direct material cost per unit. Remember, direct materials are purely variable, so we can simply take one of our direct materials costs, say the 240,000 in the first quarter, divided by 80,000 units, and we get $3 per unit. We would have gotten the same number had we used the cost in production for the second, third, or fourth quarters. For direct materials or direct labor, we'll take the 96 and divide it by 80, and our direct labor cost is $1.20 per unit, and we've estimated overhead of $4.10, and so we have an estimated unit cost of direct materials plus direct labor plus our manufacturing overhead of $8.30 per unit. Based on this, if we were to produce 70,000 units, we would have estimated our total cost for the 70,000 units to be 70,000 times $8.30 per unit, or $580,650. Now in part 3, we're told that rather than using a single predetermined overhead rate, which was again just based on number of units, the firm has decided to estimate manufacturing overhead cost using the HighLow method, and we need to use the cost data for the most recent year to estimate a cost formula and to estimate total manufacturing overhead cost for 70,000 units. We'll begin recall by looking at the high level of output or production and the low level of output or production, not the cost, but the level of production. Our high number of units occurred in the first quarter, 80,000. Our low level was in the third quarter, 20,000. And then we're going to want to pick up our manufacturing overhead cost for the high month, or rather high quarter. That was 228,000. And our low was the 192,000. Then we need to take the difference between those two, or calculate the change, the 80 minus the 20. And again, we can just copy that across. Our variable cost then again is the change in cost divided by the change in units. So our total cost or change in cost was 36,000. The change in units was 60,000 units. So our variable cost per unit is 60 cents. Let's go ahead then and calculate the fixed portion. First we need to pick up the cost for either the high or the low quarter. We're going to pick up the high. total cost, manufacturing overhead, was the 228,000. Our number of units, or rather our cost per unit, we estimated at 60. Our cost per unit in the high quarter, that was the 80,000. So our variable cost element would have been 80,000 units times 60 cents per unit. The variable portion of that would have been 48,000, which means the fixed component would have been the 228 minus the total variable, or 180,000. On a per unit basis then, our direct materials, we calculated that up in the second part. That was $3 per unit. Direct labor was $1.20 per unit. Our variable manufacturing overhead cost, we've just estimated at 60 cents per unit. So our total variable cost per unit is the sum of those three, or $4.80. Based on this, and remember our fixed cost component, what would we estimate for the cost of producing 70,000 units next quarter? Well, we've got our fixed cost of 180,000 plus our variable cost per unit, total variable cost of $4.80. Again, that included direct materials, labor, and overhead, times the 70,000 units. We would have estimated, using our high-low method, our cost for the coming period of $516. Why is this different than our estimated cost of $580 when we calculate an applied overhead on the basis of a single predetermined overhead rate, on applying overhead on the basis of number of units? Go ahead and think about that and enter your answer on the worksheet.